When we're studying population, one of the things that we look at is something called population density. Population density is just the comparison of the population size to the land area or the size of a country. Now, there are a couple of types of population density that we discuss. One is called the arithmetic population density, which is the basic land area of the entire country in comparison with the population size. It's usually expressed as so many people per square mile. In the United States, something like 75 people per square mile. Now, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, because if you come from western Oklahoma, you know that it's often the case that there are, maybe just a few houses, few families out in the rural countryside. So population, actual population density in the western part of Oklahoma may simply be, 12 people per square mile, something like that. While if you live in suburban Edmond or Manhattan, New York, population density can be astronomically high. And that's because, of course, we have different ways of placing people, and you can pack people into large cities, and population densities are very high. This is an important fact to remember. Now, there's another type of population density that we can look at, and it's the comparison of population to not the entire land area of a country, but the amount of land area that is capable of supporting agriculture, what we call arable land. And that amount of land that's capable of supporting agriculture is, that's a measure, in a sense, of sort of the agricultural resource base of a country. Now, the arable land to population density is often referred to as the physiological or the physiologic population density. And it used to have a lot of relevance. But in a globalized world where food can be transported rapidly overland or even by air and by sea, population density and the amount of arable land assumes that countries are not trading with one another, that there's not access outside of a country. So even though the physiological population density has always been used in textbooks to express, the viability of a country to feed itself, today it makes a lot more sense to just look at other variables of development. So anyway, population density, arithmetic versus physiologic. Physiologic population density makes more sense if you're talking about countries that are underdeveloped, where agriculture is a subsistence type, where perhaps even people are still hunters and gatherers. And this is, in a sense, very similar to what biologists would identify as something called a carrying capacity of the land. If you, have some rural land, and say you have 100 acres in central Oklahoma, and your deer population is very abundant, then the deer population can even become sort of stunted if there are too many in one area. If they get a little close to the carrying capacity, that's the idea of this physiologic population density. And of course, even deer will migrate once they wind up eating all of the better food sources. So human beings will also tend to migrate, and when economies stagnate, people tend to immigrate, and that's one thing we want to keep in mind here. So, population density. Oh yeah, one other thing. Population density and economic development really are not correlated whatsoever. Sometimes sometimes you'll hear people talk about, a crowded country like Bangladesh. Well, Bangladesh is perhaps, crowded, particularly in the large cities, but there's also wilderness in Bangladesh, lots of farmland. But you could also look at, say, the Netherlands or Denmark, populations that are also fairly dense populations, high density populations. But very, very wealthy economies, very wealthy people for the most part. So, population density, be careful with it.